They didn't fight. There was no betrayal, no toxicity, and yet it still ended. The question is, why do some relationships feel perfect, but still collapse? There's a moment in almost every relationship where everything looks right, but something feels off. No fights, no obvious problems, no dramatic red flags. Just a quiet, persistent discomfort that you can't fully explain. It's not loud enough to leave, but not peaceful enough to stay. And that silent tension is where the truth about emotional compatibility begins to reveal itself. Most people believe love is about connection, chemistry, attraction, but emotional compatibility is something far deeper, something far quieter, and often something far more dangerous when ignored. Because you can love someone deeply and still feel alone beside them. You can share memories, laughter, even intimacy, and still feel misunderstood at your core. And that's the part nobody prepares you for. Emotional compatibility is not about how much you love each other. It's about how safely your emotions can exist around each other. Because love without emotional safety slowly turns into emotional exhaustion. In the beginning, everything feels easy. Conversations flow, attention feels natural, and even silence feels comfortable. But early connection is often built on curiosity, not reality. You're learning each other, adapting, impressing, adjusting your edges so they fit. And in that phase, incompatibility hides beautifully, because both people are trying, not being. But time doesn't reveal love. Time reveals truth. And truth doesn't come in dramatic moments. It comes in small patterns, in how they respond when you're upset, in how they listen when you're vulnerable, in how they react when you don't match their mood, in how they handle your silence, your anger, your fears, your depth. Because emotional compatibility is not tested in happiness. It's tested in discomfort. When you express something that matters to you, do they try to understand, or do they try to fix you? When you feel low, do they sit with you, or do they withdraw because it's too much? When you communicate pain, do they become defensive, or do they become aware? These moments don't look big, but they define everything. Because slowly, without even realizing, you start editing yourself. You stop saying certain things because they don't respond well. You hide certain emotions because they make things awkward. You reduce your intensity, your honesty, your vulnerability, just to maintain peace. And that's where emotional incompatibility becomes dangerous. Because it doesn't break the relationship suddenly. It reshapes you slowly. You become quieter, smaller, more controlled. Not because you've healed, but because you've adapted to survive emotionally. And the worst part is you might still call it love. Because love can exist even in misalignment. But emotional compatibility determines whether that love feels peaceful or painful. There are people who love deeply, but cannot handle depth. They enjoy your presence, but not your emotions. They want your affection, but not your truth. And when you try to show them your inner world, they don't reject you directly. They just fail to meet you there. And that failure creates distance. Not physical distance, emotional distance. The kind where you're sitting next to each other, but feeling miles apart. where conversations exist, but understanding doesn't, where connection feels temporary, not stable, and over time you start questioning yourself. Am I too much? Am I overthinking? Why can't I just be simple? But the truth is, you're not too much. You're just not emotionally aligned. Because the right emotional connection doesn't make you question your nature. It gives your nature space to exist. Emotional compatibility is about rhythm, not similarity, rhythm. Two people don't need to feel the same things, but they need to respect how the other feels. One person might be expressive, the other reserved. One might process emotions instantly, the other needs time. These differences are not problems until they become dismissive, because emotional compatibility is not about being identical. It's about being responsive. If one person expresses and the other invalidates, imbalance begins. If one person needs reassurance and the other avoids it, insecurity grows. If one person seeks depth and the other avoids emotional conversations, connection weakens. And slowly, love turns into effort. Not beautiful effort, exhausting effort. The kind where you're always trying to explain yourself, trying to be understood, trying to feel seen. But emotional compatibility is when understanding doesn't feel like a fight, feels natural. Effort exists, but it doesn't drain you, because both people are emotionally available, not just emotionally present. And that difference changes everything, because someone can be present physically, text you, meet you, spend time with you, but still be emotionally unavailable. Unavailable to understand, unavailable to empathize, unavailable to hold space for your emotional world. And when that happens, you don't feel loved. You feel tolerated. And tolerance is not connection. The most dangerous relationships are not toxic ones. They're the almost right ones, where nothing is obviously wrong, but nothing feels deeply right either, where you can't explain the discomfort, but you feel it constantly, and you stay, because it's not bad enough to leave, but slowly, it becomes heavy enough to break you, because emotional incompatibility doesn't explode. It accumulates in small misunderstandings, in repeated emotional disconnections, in moments where you needed presence, but received distance. And one day you don't feel the same anymore, not because love ended suddenly, but because emotional safety was never built. And without emotional safety, love cannot sustain itself, fades quietly. There's another truth most people ignore. Attraction can create connection, but emotional compatibility sustains it. You can be attracted to someone's personality, looks, energy, but if your emotional needs don't align, that attraction will turn into confusion, because you'll feel drawn to them, but drained by them at the same time, pulled in and pushed away constantly. And that push-pull dynamic feels intense, feels passionate. It feels like something special, but often it's just emotional mismatch. Because real emotional compatibility doesn't feel like chaos. It feels like clarity, not intensity, stability, not confusion, understanding, not guessing, knowing. You don't have to decode their behavior. If I struggle, I will not be abandoned emotionally. And that trust creates something rare. Freedom. Freedom to be emotionally honest. Freedom to be vulnerable. Freedom to exist fully without fear of being too much. And that's what most people are actually searching for. Not love, but emotional freedom within love. Because love without freedom feels like pressure. But emotional compatibility gives love space to breathe. And when love can breathe, it grows naturally. There's no forcing, no convincing, no constant adjusting, just alignment. But here's the part most people avoid facing. Emotional compatibility is not always found. Sometimes it's built, but only when both people are willing to understand, willing to grow, willing to unlearn patterns that damage connection. Because sometimes the problem is not incompatibility. It's emotional immaturity, the inability to handle emotions, yours or theirs, avoidance, defensiveness, insecurity. These things block compatibility, even when potential exists. And if both people recognize that, compatibility can be created. But if only one person is trying, it will always feel one-sided, because emotional growth cannot be forced. It must be chosen. And if someone is not willing to meet you emotionally, no amount of love will fix that. Because emotional availability is not something you can teach someone who refuses to learn. And that's where acceptance becomes painful. Realizing that love is there, but alignment is not. And choosing to walk away from someone you love, not because they are wrong, but because they are not right for you emotionally. That's one of the hardest decisions anyone can make, because it doesn't feel logical. It feels emotional, confusing, heavy, but necessary, because staying in emotional misalignment costs more than leaving, costs your peace, your identity, your ability to feel understood. And slowly, it changes how you see yourself. You start believing you are difficult to love, when in reality, you were just not emotionally met. And there is a difference, a huge difference, because the right emotional connection doesn't make you feel hard to love. It makes you feel naturally understood, not perfectly, but genuinely. And that genuineness is enough, because emotional compatibility is not about perfection. It's about effort that feels mutual, understanding that feels real, and connection that feels stable. And when you experience that, you realize something powerful. Love was never supposed to feel confusing. It was never supposed to feel like constant doubt. It was never supposed to make you question your emotional needs. It was supposed to feel like you finally don't have to explain why you feel the way you feel, because someone just understands. Not always immediately, not always perfectly, but willingly. And that willingness is the foundation of everything, because at the end of the day, emotional compatibility is not about finding someone who feels exactly like you. It's about finding someone who respects how you feel, even when they don't fully understand it. Someone who listens without trying to control, who stays without making you earn their presence, who responds without making you regret your honesty. And when you find that, you won't feel overwhelmed. You won't feel confused. You won't feel like you're trying to hold something together. You'll feel something much quieter, something most people overlook: peace. And that peace is how you know it's real, because real emotional connection doesn't scream. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't create chaos. It simply stays consistent, present, understanding. And in a world where most connections are temporary, that kind of emotional stability becomes rare. And once you experience it, you'll never confuse intensity with compatibility again. You'll never settle for being misunderstood. You'll never shrink yourself to fit into someone else's emotional limitations. Because you'll know, love is not just about being chosen. It's about being understood while being chosen. And that changes everything. And this is the truth most people spend years trying to understand. Love is not what keeps two people together. Alignment is, because when two people are emotionally compatible, connection flows naturally. Effort feels effortless. Understanding feels real. But when they are not, even the strongest feelings begin to feel heavy, confusing, incomplete. So before you question love, ask yourself something deeper. Are we truly connected, or just trying to make it work? Because in the end, love without compatibility doesn't break suddenly, slowly fades, until clarity replaces attachment. And if you felt this, if you understood this, then you are already seeing relationships at a level most people never reach. Subscribe to Voxlore Audio, because here we don't just talk about love. We reveal the psychology behind why it works, or why it quietly fails.